It's important to realize that the notes in a triad are pitch classes. In actual music, they are rarely presented as these tight little snowman stacks. More often, you'll see the notes spread out a bit, and there might be more than one of each of the three notes. In musical scores, you'll often see chords spread out in time as well, as in this song, composed by the last sovereign monarch of the Kingdom of Hawaii. The first measure contains a G major chord and a C major chord. In the G major chord, the G's, B's, and D's are spread out and don't all happen at the same time. The same goes for the C major chord. Also, in the sung melody, there are some notes that aren't part of the chord. These are called embellishing tones. Generally, we don't pay much attention to how the three notes of a triad are spaced out or how many of each note there is. What we do pay attention to is which of the three notes is the lowest sounding note. This is what we call the bass note. When a chord's root is the lowest note, we say that this chord is in root position. We can think of root position as the default chord position. When a note other than a chord's root is the bass note, we say that the chord is inverted. If the chord's third is in the bass, we say it is in first inversion. Here, the chord is still a C major chord, and the root of the chord is still C, but the bass note, the lowest sounding note, is an E, which is the third of the chord. If the chord's fifth is in the bass, we say it is in second inversion. Again, this is still a C major chord, but the bass note is a G, the chord's fifth. As with root position chords, the arrangement of the upper voices doesn't change the way we label inverted chords. We label inverted chords in two ways. In lead sheet notation, we write the chord, then we indicate its bass note after a slash. So a first inversion C major chord would be labeled C/E, and a second inversion C major chord would be labeled C/G. If there's no slash, that means the chord is in root position. So a root position C major chord would just be labeled C. The other way to indicate inversion is through the use of figured bass symbols. Figured bass symbols are stacks of numbers indicating the intervals above the bass note that form the chord you're looking at. Any root position triad has the numerals 5, 3, because root position triads have a fifth and a third above the bass. The numerals are always stacked with the largest number on top, and the stacks don't change with different chord spacings. Any first inversion triad has the numerals 6, 3, since there's a sixth and a third above the bass note. And any second inversion triad has the numerals 6, 4, since there is a sixth and fourth above the bass note. Here are some more examples. A first inversion D major triad would be written as D/F sharp with the figured bass symbols 6, 3. A second inversion E flat minor triad would be written as E flat minor/B flat with the figures 6, 4. A first inversion G diminished triad would be written G diminished/B flat with the figures 6, 3. And a second inversion C augmented triad would be written C augmented/G sharp with the figures 6, 4. In practice, figured bass symbols are usually abbreviated. We usually don't bother writing the 5, 3 for root position chords. Since root position is the default, we just go with no figures at all. For first inversion chords, we usually abbreviate it to just the number 6 instead of 6, 3, which is the complete figures. And for second inversion triads, we don't abbreviate. We always write both the 6 and the 4 in figured bass. So if we go back up to the triads we looked at before, we can add a third row for the abbreviated figured bass. The first inversion D major triad would now have just the figure 6. The second inversion E flat minor triad would keep the 6 and the 4. The first inversion G diminished triad would get 6, and then the C augmented triad in second inversion would keep 6, 4.